Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the webcast, Accountability, the Remote Work Elephant in the Room, sponsored by BPM.
My name is Jill Pappenheimer, and I lead the HR consulting practice at BPM. I've been doing HR my entire career. At BPM, our support is really helping companies of all sizes, shapes and sizes, and trying to help elevate the HR function. Our support is anywhere from systems to culture.
Thanks, Jill. Hi, everyone. My name is Stacy Litteral. I am a managing director with the HR consulting team at BPM. And I, like Jill, have spent most of my career in HR. I have a passion for people strategy and connecting people to strategy.
The key thing that I would like you to take away from this slide is if you are needing support with your role in HR, whether it's backup for you when you're gone or really taking the function to the next level, whether that's in comp or compliance or overall, we can help jump in.
So I thought it would be helpful to drill down into this data and figure out what is relevant data, what is data that makes predictors about the future, and how we can integrate this data into thinking about our performance process. So the first piece is that more than half of the workforce would prefer to work from home, work remotely even after the pandemic is over. So that's overwhelming, right? That's a sea change in the work environment, that more than half of workers would want to work from home after this. So it's definitely something that we can't ignore at this point, the future of the remote workforce. The next piece is the technology piece. And I think this was a mark as to whether or not technology was going to be embraced, if it was going to be easy, if it was going to work with this new remote workforce. We had to turn on a dime back in March. And what this tells us is that it worked, right? That most people think that their transition to a heavily technology-based set of tools to do their job was very or somewhat easy. And so that's helpful, knowing that we can implement various technologies to help us with our processes. The next piece here is about meeting deadlines and completing projects on time, right? Like that's the epitome of accountability, is meeting deadlines and completing projects. That's what accountability is. So here, that 19% of people are saying that that's difficult. We feel that that's an important data point, that there are some people that are struggling with that, getting their projects done. And the next piece of data around feeling motivated to do their work most definitely has something to do with that if people are not motivated, they're definitely not going to be inspired and feel responsible to get their work done. So there are some key pieces of data that we've seen over and over and over that really tell us that we need to think differently about the performance process, the tools that we use, and how we can make this work in an ongoing and sustainable fashion. So this next slide really just focuses on employee engagement, which is really important, right? We know as HR people that—
You see oh, there you go. The slide was delayed.
Sorry about that. That the state of engagement currently, there's some conflicting data that we've seen, but this is coming from a very reliable source, that engagement has actually dropped and seen the most significant drop during this pandemic, even more significant than past recessions or post 9/11, that in total 68% of workers are either not engaged or actively disengaged, which is an overwhelming number. So employee engagement, employee experience is a really important component of the performance process, and making sure that the process is engaging and that the conversations and the ongoing feedback really takes into account that there needs to be a positive employee experience here in order to help boost engagement. And we know that feedback is a motivator and does help people engage. So we're coming from that standpoint when we reflect on this data and how we think about this process moving forward. There are a lot of things happening to people who are working in the remote workforce that, as employers, we would need to address. Employees are lonely, they're isolated, They miss the office potlucks and birthday parties and happy hours, the social connection that the in-person workplace brought. So we need to really think differently about how we support people and think of some tips and tricks. So the one that we wanted to share with you is that Jill and I on our team, we start every meeting with what we call connection before content. We assign the responsibility to someone to come up with a way to spend the first 15 minutes of the meeting connecting as a team. Sometimes they're open-ended questions that end up in tears. Sometimes they're fun games like scavenger hunts or show and tell type of things, but they're ways for the team to connect, even virtually. And those have been really important pieces of our meeting, and it's well worth the time to make sure that everyone has a voice to tell each other how they're feeling and to connect like they used to around the water cooler. So same thing with the performance process. We want to ensure that the performance process is supporting people and is allowing people to be seen and heard for what they're truly experiencing right now. A lot of people experiencing care issues, whether it's elderly parents or children who are homeschooling, whatever may be happening, we need to acknowledge that and have a process that supports what our teams are going through. Obviously, staying healthy physically and mentally is really important, a little bit more challenging with places like gyms closed. How do we support and recommend exercise for our teams, and think of things like expanded EAPs, other things that we can do as an HR team to support and acknowledge that these things are in fact going on for our teams.
Increased productivity and job satisfaction can be a component of this remote work scenario where people are all over the globe and trying to work together from their homes, or maybe it's a mixed scenario. And I'm sure you've heard that a lot of employees enjoy and appreciate the remote work. Some don't. But if there's an opportunity to really take the most from this remote work scenario, it can be done in a way where you are increasing productivity, you are getting increased job satisfaction, employees are loving this, and you're getting people aligned together around a culture and a shared mission, and communication is happening, and you've got a regular feedback loop. And all of that can be done so that when people are scattered all over the world or all over the state or the city where you are, you can come together as one unified entity. So I want you to envision this environment where managers are going to become great coaches. So ideally, that's the scenario you want to strive for, where managers are not just supervising or micromanaging, but being great coaches of their employees, guiding their employees. And retention rate increases, where challenging behavior is addressed. This is an interesting topic that we're going to spend a little more time on, where behavior is brought to the management level. So when you have challenging behavioral issues, or you have positive behavior, that it's engaged at the management between employees and managers versus coming to HR, specifically when you have a challenge. So we're going to spend a little time looking at what that might look like. But imagine that, right, where that is managed well. A cultural cadence ripe for change and innovation is born, and a sense of belonging is achieved. So all of these pieces can really be a well-oiled machine in a remote environment. And of course, there's the scenario where managers feel like they have to manage because they have no idea what their employees are doing in another location, right? And who knows, a lot of employees may be watching TV, but we want to get to a scenario where we are confident they're getting their work done. We don't necessarily care what they're doing minute to minute, hour to hour, but that they're meeting their responsibilities and their objectives. In summary, we are ideally looking for a remote environment where employees are connected and accountable, and more importantly, employee engagement is taken to that next level, which is a tough thing to do, but we're hoping to give you enough content here you feel confident you can implement this at your facility.
So when we think about a performance process, where really one of the big objectives is to affect turnover, to retain talent. So it's important for us to think about, why do employees leave? And we also need to think about, what do employees need, right? Because if they're not getting what they need, probably they're going to leave. So big questions that leaders need to always be thinking about, especially in this this challenging environment where there's a talent shortage, which we'll talk a little bit about later. And then it's a two-way street. So we need to think about, what do we need from our employees? Really, the answer is all of these, which is, could be discouraging from an employer's perspective, like, wow, that's a lot for us to manage. But the reality is, that's what we need to strive for from an HR perspective, from a business leader perspective. We need to be able to provide as much of all of this as we can in order to ensure a great place to work, engaged team, and a motivated team that's ready to be accountable, take responsibility, and do the work that we need them to do. So thank you for participating in that poll. When we think about why employees leave, traditionally we've heard employees don't leave jobs, they leave their managers. They're not leaving the work. They, for the most part, like the work. They're leaving their, overbearing command and control type of manager. And that may have been true back in the day when people stayed at jobs for many, many years. But today, it's much more complicated. Employees are leaving due to things like a toxic culture, lack of connectedness, lack of opportunities for growth and development, lack of autonomy, being micromanaged, flexibility, trust, and leadership. People are leaving for much more complicated and personal reasons than just simply leaving a manager. So it's something, as we think about turnover and employee engagement, is really important for us to consider that we have a process and tools in place that do as much of what the employees need from us as we possibly can. Another thing that we can't ignore at this point is social changes here. It's a great thing that things are going on. We swore in our first female minority female vice president today, which is really exciting. Social change is upon us, and with social media being so incredibly accessible and information being so readily available about good employers or good jobs or bad jobs, we have to be in front of that and make sure that that as employers we are putting our best foot out there, and that we are able to attract and retain the talent that we need. Movements like Me Too, diversity, equity, and inclusion is huge right now. And we can't ignore that there's a talent shortage. Right now it's an employees market, and with the global talent pool being more competitive and being huge, right? Anybody, if you're a remote employer, you can employ anyone from all over the world, which is a real game changer. When I was potty training my kids, I couldn't force them. They needed to be ready to do it, right? Like, you can't force employees to be responsible. You need them to have that come from within. They need to want to be responsible. They need to want to work hard for you. There are definitely things that we can do as employers to set them up for that and support that. But at the end of the day, we need them to be responsible. We can't force that. Clear expectation and progress updates make it easier. That's kind of the obvious answer to accountability, is making sure expectations are clear and that you as leaders are communicating with them regularly why it's important for them to take ownership, to be responsible, and progress updates on those expectations, that there's a process set up for that. It's not a painful once a year process, but it's a simple, guided, ongoing process of progress updates. And then a strong culture. All of this ties back to culture, where having a culture of accountability also requires that you have a culture of caring about your employees that motivates them to fulfill their commitments. At the end of the day, it's much like raising kids and asking them to make their beds and all of those things. Employees who feel cared for by their managers will want to work hard for you. They will come through for you. People who are neglected or treated poorly in this day and age are just not going to do that. And so we feel very strongly that a positive and strong culture will support a culture of accountability. We also feel that it's really important for the process to be employee driven. We think that employees will take ownership. It will save supervisors a ton of time having to process themselves if we empower the employees to, define their own responsibilities, set their own goals, set their own roadmap of how they're going to get there, and then communicate that to managers versus it being a top-down approach. That will definitely help with the ownership and the responsibility that people feel when they are coming to work. So by letting your employees control their own work, set their own goals, you'll get more motivated people. And that is, as a recovering control freak myself, it's hard to let that go. It's hard to trust that people are going to set the goals that you would want them to set. But trust me, if you try it, it's a game changer as far as the motivation and the ownership that you see people take over their responsibilities, and it ultimately will help your business.
And if I can just jump in on this one, I would add we mentioned briefly the importance of a tool that supports this process and makes it sticky. If your tool doesn't allow for this employee-driven aspect, it may not be successful. So the importance of employees driving their own creation of what they own, their own opportunity to talk to their managers, their own development capability, all of these pieces need to be supported, and a tool is going to help make that consistent and help make it clear that the organization really is supporting this employee-driven aspect. Sorry, Stacy.
No problem. Okay, so back to you, Joe.
Just jumped in right when I was about to jump in anyway. So promoting accountability. So what I want you to get on the slide is, again, what I just was mentioning, the importance of this employee driven aspect is about employees defining what they actually are accountable for. And for example, they're given a job description when they're hired. Are they participating in the feedback around that job description? And could they then participate in onboarding of a performance tool at hire where they're clarifying what they actually own from a responsibility and a goal standpoint? And I'll jump to that last bullet, not only from a goal standpoint, but measuring success. So what does success look like for them? So all of those pieces are important in this ability to promote accountability in your environment. Cascading goals from beginning to end, and regular communication, and then learning and development. Number 4, this growth opportunities are all key. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about each one of those in the coming slides. Employees to define their own responsibilities and goals, whether they're short-term or long-term. They should define what those are, when they're expected to get those goals or responsibilities, goals done. They need a time frame would be around the goals. And then defining what that success looks like I spoke about before. And I would argue that may need to be chunked, right? So when an employee defines their success, what does it look like to be behind? What does it look like to be on track? What does it look like to be ahead? So get very clear on that definition of success so they can be very clear of their expectations, and the manager can be very clear on what those expectations are. So managers should sign on those defined responsibilities and goals. And then this third bullet refers to, excuse me, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier around how you want behavior to be addressed between employees and managers. Excuse me. And one way to do that is through your core values. So hopefully as an organization, you've defined what those core values are, that behavior you want your organization to embrace. And that then you can bring those core values to defining the behavior that you want your employees to engage in. So you want that to be part of a feedback, excuse me, part of a feedback loop. There we go, better. Where behavior is addressed when employees and managers are coming together for one-on-one meetings, whether that's monthly, whether that's quarterly, ideally not more than that, where they're addressing performance and how people are doing on their responsibilities and goals. You also want to be able to tie behavior into those conversations. You want to empower those managers to have those conversations. They can be scary for a lot of managers out there, but if you give them a framework for those conversations, it doesn't have to be scary. They can be supported through their tool. So this last section is around leaders need to demonstrate and emulate what the rest of their employees should also be embracing. So you want to mentor this concept and carry it through as an organization, whether it's at the supervisor level or leadership. Cascading goals. You want those goals that are cascading throughout the organization to be aligned to your strategy. So organizational level objectives need to be clearly defined and communicated so that employees know what they are. And then ideally, they're linking their own individual goals, those strategic objectives within the organization. And then it should be cascading down. So you've got your corporate-wide initiatives, you've got your divisional initiatives or objectives, and then maybe manager and individual. So you want one visual line of sight to be clear. And ideally, you have this transparency aspect where everybody can see what others are working on, not necessarily how they're doing, but what they're working on. So wanted to throw this slide in there. This is a cute slide where, making fun of performance reviews that are annual. You're out here because you're supposed to receive a performance review. I'm out here because I'm supposed to give one. This was a painful initiative, the annual performance review. And the movement out of annual reviews to ongoing conversations and ongoing feedback was a pivotal one and so important on many levels. Let's go to the next slide. So you want feedback on an ongoing basis so you can course correct. If there's anything that I would want you to get out of this slide is that aspect. How can someone adjust their behavior and where they're headed in terms of their responsibilities or goals if they don't have feedback and can't course correct, right? So you want that loop to be continuous. Ideally, we would argue monthly, but somewhere in that range of monthly to quarterly, because if course correction is going to happen, it has to happen in a timely manner. You want that feedback to come from potentially other places beyond just the manager, maybe other colleagues, which speaks to the 360, and the 360 can be a very valuable tool if it's done well, and if it lays out the responsibilities of an individual so that the person who's giving that 360 can actually see what the employee is responsible for, ideally in their own words, right? So again, it all ties together. Continuous feedback increases the trust between employees and their managers, opens communication up, boosts team engagement and collaboration. And this last bullet point is really key, this agility. You want organizations to be able to change on a dime, right? Because priorities are changing in our global marketplace due to all the different dynamics that are going on in the world, whether you're in a manufacturing environment or a biotech environment, changing priorities happen, and you want your employees to change with them. So communication has to be open down to the individual level. Next slide. And then growth. This is speaking to learning and development, the importance of employees having opportunities to learn and to grow. And again, whether you're in a manufacturing environment where people are frontline or you're dealing with highly skilled professionals, there needs to be some kind of opportunity, or even if it's down to the project level, for an employee to feel like there's an opportunity to get involved in a project outside of maybe their day-to-day work. So I would argue that whether it's project-based or career-based or a career track within your organization or a roadmap, you want to somehow have creative opportunities for people to do something different and to grow for themselves. And this is especially important for millennials. And then celebrate success, up and down and celebrate success. So important. We need that as individuals. We need to know we're doing good work. We need to know if we're not doing good work, what we're doing and how we can make improvements. We need feedback, but ideally you are empowering your managers to give feedback to their employees, positive or negative, but celebrate those successes.
Okay, so we've gone through kind of the 5 key components of an effective performance process. It's really important for us to think about what employees should get out of those conversations. What do they need to know? What are the most important things that they need to know? And then we'll talk on the next slide about what the employers need to know. But most importantly, employees need to know what are their unique and primary job responsibilities, KPIs, OKRs, whatever you use, measurement tools. But they need to know what are those job responsibilities. And ideally, they're defining those themselves and aligning to the, like Jill was talking about, cascading responsibilities and goals. They also need to know how they're performing against expectations and what is their roadmap forward. That needs to come out of regular and ongoing conversations. And to Jill's point, the roadmap could change. It needs to be flexible and agile. A lot of people said flexibility is needed. Those regular conversations will allow that roadmap to be flexible if needed. They need to know how they are contributing to organizational objectives. So they need to be connected to what is the company, what are their key initiatives, down to what are the management's objectives, and then down to the individual contributor. Everybody needs to know that they're supporting the ultimate goal of the organization and how they're the strategy and how they fit in. That sense of belonging is really, really critical, not only from an employee motivation standpoint, but from an overall productivity and helping the organization meet their ultimate objectives. So those are the key pieces that we feel employees should know. Managers should know what are their employees thinking and feeling. And this, sounds like an impossible task, but by setting up those regular and ongoing conversations with some guided questions around responsibilities, goals, core values, and behaviors, you can ask the question, managers can ask the question, tell me how things are going. How are you feeling about XYZ project? How are you feeling about working remotely? What are you struggling with? Having those conversations ongoing allows employees to be seen and heard and feel cared for. How are they performing against expectations, right? That's how we ultimately manage accountability. And that's probably not a surprise to people that are the answer to how you manage accountability in the remote work environment is by having these regular conversations and talk with the employees about how are they performing against the expectations, talk about the roadmap, adjust the roadmap if needed. Also need to know the employee's strengths and weaknesses. So if you have projects you need to assign, knowing who's good in what areas is really, really important. Honoring those strengths by rewarding more work or projects or celebrating successes of those strengths. But then also identifying weaknesses, areas of opportunity, and ideally developing a growth and development plan around those weaknesses. But sometimes addressing and documenting and performance managing those weaknesses as well. And then ideally, there are great coaches. They're not just giving orders or going through the motions, but they're really helping their employees become successful. And that's a challenge, right? The transition from being a manager to being a leader and a coach is not an easy one, especially for newer managers, younger managers who may be earlier in their career. But a guided process with the right tools can really support that. So we've talked a lot about the process, the key components of the process. What we'd like you to do is think about your organization and where you're at, and do you have, and if so, what is it, a vision-driven tool that aligns your company's culture, your organization's culture, to promote accountability? Do you have a tool? Whether it's it could be a paper document, which wouldn't be ideal, but is it a software system? Is it a tool? Do you have a tool that will help you allow this process to be sticky? Jill said early on, we all have great ideas about coming to these webinars and hearing all these great ideas and being inspired. But at the end of the day, what tool do you have in place to ensure that the process is sticky, that it's something everyone is comfortable being a part of, and something that will help your process be executed successfully for in the future?
And ideally, your tool should support the implementation of this process, right? Because we can talk about this till we're blue in the face. But one, implementing these kind of changes in your organization, it can be an uphill battle. And keeping them sticky and executable can be an uphill battle. So you want to choose a tool that can support what we're talking about, these best practices, ideally.
Yeah, thank you, Jill. So when we think about what does success mean in this process, and when you think about a tool that can support success, what it really looks like is an overall strategy, right? Your organization's overall strategy. How is that strategy communicated to your people? How are the people getting the message as to what is important and what the priorities, what is the culture, what are the values and behaviors that are embraced by the company as a whole? So how do you communicate that strategy to the people? And then how do the people turn that strategy into execution? So it's that cyclical process of strategy communicated to people kind of coached and supported and held accountable to execute the individual goals, team goals, collaborative goals that will ultimately lead back to a successful strategy. So really thinking about that cyclical process.
Stacy, I want to just acknowledge your mic is going in and out. Somebody mentioned that on the chat, and I'm hearing it as well.
Okay, let me see. Sorry about that. Let me see if I can see if that's better for me. Is that better?
So far, so good.
Okay, thank you for heads up. We love technology. Okay, so in thinking about a tool again, we wanted to give you some kind of key questions that you should ask if you're going to look for a tool or develop a tool or whatever you think fits your organization best. The tool should support, I would say, most importantly, should support employee enthusiasm. I feel pretty strongly about this one, that if it is something that the employees do not want to participate in, or is hard, or requires a lot of training, they probably will not partake in the process. So that is really important, that it is a tool that is people can be enthusiastic about. Like, it's easy, it looks nice, it's somewhat fun to be a part of, and they're open to that, using that tool. The next is that there's a coaching framework. As I mentioned earlier, coaching is not an easy skill to develop. especially, like I said, for managers maybe earlier on in their career. So if there is a opportunity for a tool to have a coaching framework that would support managers in developing their coaching skills, that would be ideal. We've talked a lot about alignment to strategy, alignment to overall corporate initiatives, and big one, we've talked a lot about regular performance conversations. So a tool that really supports a flexible timeline. Oops, sorry, I see that my audio is still, so I'm going to give it another shot. Hopefully that's better. So supports regular performance conversations and allows for that course correction that we've talked a lot about here. So at the risk of sounding a little bit salesy, we actually have a tool that BPM owns, and we have developed, a team of HR leaders developed, that really supports all of these, has all of these components. All of this content was really the driving force behind developing BPM Link. It's really simple, easy to use, employee driven, which is a critical component we talked about, that connects the employee's work to the strategic direction of the organization. Just wanted to very quickly show a slide of what the tool looks like. You can see it's clean, it's simple, it's inviting. It supports those nimble guided conversations between employees and their managers. It's driven by the employee, and it connects the employee to all and their work that they get to define to the corporate strategic initiatives. And this third bullet point is really interesting, and I think we talk a lot about perceptions, what employees perceive to be important, what they perceive to be their progress on certain goals. It uncovers those gaps and allows there to be real discussions about what's really going on and make those changes in a timely manner. And then connects the corporate strategy to every employee in the organization. Someone wrote earlier in the chat that peer accountability is really important. This tool definitely supports that, and I couldn't agree more that when teams know what others are responsible for, whether it's a team goal or somebody in your department, they can see and support and provide feedback on what everyone is working on and essentially hold each other accountable for what they're doing. So that's a really important piece as well. I appreciate that comment. So no more slides on BPM Link. Just wanted to let you guys know we would be happy to give a complimentary demo to anyone who would like to see the tool. It can be rolled out in less than 30 days. It's a lot more affordable than you would think. And we absolutely love what it has done for a couple of organizations I've worked for in the past and rolled it out. It was a game changer for us. So whether you choose BPM Link or a different tool, there are a lot of tools out there. You can create your own tools as well. It is really just very important that you have a tool that helps keep this process sticky. And this is kind of the summary slide around the three key constituents, the key parties involved in driving cohesiveness. It's driven by the employees first and foremost. The managers become coaches. They create clear accountability and transparency into how things are going. They offer candid feedback. And then the organization benefits by having overall strategic alignment, resources that match priorities, and then allowing for the ability to scale if that's what is needed.
So I just want to add that when you consider various tools out there, and there are a lot of tools out there, we have worked with various tools as well. And, you know, BPM uses this tool, but the BPM Link tool, but we've looked at a lot of different tools. And I would say, ensure that the tool you're using, if not this one, is one where it is simple to use so that the employees can embrace it. Because there are multiple tools out there with a lot of bells and whistles. And the more bells and whistles you have, the more complexities there are, and the more overwhelming it is. I'm sure all of you have implemented plenty of apps in your day. And you know, the bigger and the more customized it is, the more overwhelming it is. So you want to keep it simple And this employee empowerment piece is so important, because when systems are top down, when performance tools are top down, employees are not excited about participating. And so I would say simplistic and employee driven are definitely elements of